Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us today at this week's Fireside Chat with ATCA President and CEO Pete Dumont. I am Abigail Glenn Chase, ATCA's Director of Programming and Communications, and we're really excited about today's program featuring our guests, Sean Cassidy and Jay Merkle, co-chairs of the Unmanned Aircraft Safety Team, or the UAST. The UAST is an industry government partnership committed to ensuring safe operations of UAS in the national airspace system. The UAST supports the safe integration of UAS with data-driven safety enhancements through collaboration amongst members of the UAS industry and traditional aviation stakeholders. Pete and I have the honor of representing ATCA on the UAST as well as its communications subcommittee. At the helm are our UAST co-chairs, our guests today, Sean Cassidy, Director of Safety and Regulatory Affairs at Amazon Prime Air, and Jay Merkle, Executive Director of the UAS Integration Office at the FAA.
Abigail, thank you very much. I appreciate it. Glad to have you here today. Sean, Jay, good to see you again. I can see from our attendees that a lot of familiar names. I won't say faces. I wish I could say faces. I'd like to, with a lot of you on there, I'd like to see again in person as soon as possible. Shake some hands, talk about things, and get back to a normal way of doing this kind of thing. Jay, you and I have done this a number of times.
Yeah.
Yes, so you're no stranger to that. So thank you both for being here today and taking the time. And I'm just going to jump right in. So a little bit about you guys. You're both traditional aviation professionals, if you could use that term, not professionals, traditional. So Sean, you were a commercial airline pilot for Alaska Airlines for about 20 years, first vice president of the Airline Pilots Association, the largest airline union in the world. And Jay, you've been at FAA for quite a long time, most recently the deputy vice president of the Program Management Office, the PMO, and before transition into your current role as the UAS Integration Office. How'd you guys find yourselves in the drone business? Sean?
Sure. So first of all, thank you for hosting us for this conversation. This is a great opportunity to reach out virtually to the audience here. One of the things that kind of drew me into this is, as you mentioned, Pete, I have a background as a commercial airline pilot. And so early on in my career, I was involved in a number of safety programs. First, my alma mater, Alaska Airlines, you see over my shoulder there. And then in my capacity as the National Safety Coordinator for the Pilot Association. And one of the things that we had always said, and I believe it's one of the core tenets, is that at ALPA, my role as safety coordinator was promoting the responsible integration of all vehicles in the airspace as long as it could be done safely. And the nice thing is I don't have to change one single word of that statement in my role now as the principal person for safety and regulatory affairs at Amazon Prime Air. The conduit, if you will, is that I was involved in a lot of advisory work, safety work, technical work, actually hearkening back to things that we were involved in together with the Next Gen Advisory Committee and the Commercial Air Safety Team and everything else. And so it was just a natural segue to kind of move from those safety and those kind of advisory groups right into the unmanned, because frankly, my work in my previous job actually had prepared me very well because we were advising on safe integration of unmanned systems into airspace. So the topic changed a little bit, but the composition of the room was very comforting because there are a lot of the colleagues that I had previously worked with and some great new ones that I've got the ability and opportunity to meet and work with over the past 5 years.
There are some great people in this industry. It did give us, by getting into this, it has given us a wider focal view of aviation, because aviation is getting bigger. It's changing completely. And I've, like you, I've had the opportunity to work with some new aviation professionals that's been very rewarding. Jay?
Thanks, Pete. It's good to be back with you and with Sean. I'd like to be bumping elbows with you these days. Mine is a much more circuitous path to unmanned aviation or remotely piloted aviation. I had a boss, his name was Jim Eck. I think many of us will remember Jim during his time at the FAA. He hasn't passed away, I want to be
Yeah,
clear.
I was going to say.
um, but it was about the time NASA was starting up the UTM program. And Jim came to me and said, Jay, I don't understand all this. What is this? What do they need us to do in the PMO? What do we need to do? So I got sent to go talk to all the regulatory side and the folks in the ATO who were working it. And I came back and explained to Jim and helped the PMO form its initial policies around how we would engage. And then about a month before Part 107 became effective, my colleague Bill Davis literally buttonholed me in an elevator and in this frantic plea said, we're being overwhelmed by these airspace authorizations. It's taken us 90 days to get these out. We're going to be flooded. The industry is going to be even more angry with us. You've got to find a way to automate this. And so between the 10th and the 5th floor, I had an idea. I got off the elevator and went and talked to my staff. And we knew that there were a number of companies that were out there that wanted to provide a service like this, but we didn't know how to engage them. And it's funny that you would refer to me as coming from traditional. I think anyone who knows me knows I have a very difficult time following rules. And so I found ways that were within the rules and within AMS to, with the help of industry and their innovation, get the low altitude authorization and notification capability on the street in about a year. And so that kind of solidly enshrined me in the world of UAS. And it was a great honor when I was asked to come over and take over the UAS office. It really has, I've had some really great jobs in my life, but this has been a dream job. The first few months were stark terror. One, because I had never worked on the regulatory side. And I'm just trying to learn all these rules and how they work. And they didn't act like program managers or system engineers or controllers. So I was very confused by them. Then we went into a furlough, and I was the only one left in the office. And after a week, I said, I've just run out of answers. You know, when everyone comes back, I'll get you answers. But one of the first things I picked up was, as soon as I got this job, Sean started calling me and said, you're my new co-chair. I need to get together with you. And I think it's been a great partnership with Sean and with the UAST at large. And one of the things I'm really proud of what Sean and I did is help the UST organize itself and get very focused on specific work products and start creating this rhythm of not only meeting, but producing. And so I will miss Sean when his tenure ends, but it's been a great time with him.
You know, it's kind of interesting now that you mention it, because when we started out, we were actually coming into, Jay and I both started as the co-chairs for UAST, right at the edge of that furlough. So actually, we were doing most of our stuff virtually, right? I mean, it actually just hit me that here we are again. You know, we started out having to take these meetings and figure out how to be impactful and keep members engaged and everything else. And here we are again, figuring out ways that we can conduct our business virtually, which we're actually quite literally going to do right after this call. We're going to meet with our steering committee and figure out ways that we're going to be able to reach out and connect with our members. So it's ironic. I hadn't even thought that till you just mentioned that.
Yeah, and this industry and the people we have participating with us on the UAST are just so adaptable and innovative. It's really cool how we can transition through these modes and just keep on plugging along. Everybody does a great job of just keeping on plugging along.
Well, specifically with the Unmanned Aircraft Safety Team, or the UAST, where did that come from? What's it modeled after? What's the mission, the purpose, other than what Abigail told us at the beginning? I mean, a little bit more meat around it.
Sean, I'll let you start.
Sure. So the Unmanned Air Safety Team was really envisioned as a bit of a peer to the General Aviation Joint Safety Team and the Commercial Air Safety Team because of a very clear demand signal for a public-private partnership where we could get all of the members from the UAS community together and work with our colleagues over at FAA and really hear the voice of the operator, both who are conducting recreational operations and commercial operations, but also create the means by which we could promote best policies and practices for folks to go out and conduct their business safely and effectively. The challenge that we had with the Unmanned Air Safety Team with the startup, and I was involved not in a leadership position, but towards an early point with the UAST was finding common ground. Was kind of figuring out how do you reach out to all these like super diverse stakeholders and figure out that first point of entry when you could start a discussion that would be consumable by everybody. And so when Jay and I came in as the co-chairs, what we did is we went back and visited the bylaws, and we came up with basically a set of tenets to basically align the group together on a set of common beliefs and assumptions. And like one of the tenets is we may compete in the marketplace, but we cannot compete on safety. We have to basically look at the things that we do as serving a higher purpose and serving the greater good. And so, and basically we went about getting group buy-in, and then it's kind of blossomed from that. Now we're kind of looking over towards Commercial Air Safety Team, looking at places like Flight Safety Foundation, and becoming a little bit more purposeful, especially in terms of identifying and archiving key performance indicators, so that way we can say, look, we have this goal of driving up operator awareness, of having a better understanding what happens when their vehicles perform in off-nominal ways, and here's how we can ensure that it's kind of taking root. I'll pass it over to Jay, because Jay, I think, filled a super important role in kind of helping the community understand where regs are pointed, where things that are going to significantly impact the industry are pointed, and how we can become part of that change mechanism.
Sure. So transitioning from what you said, Sean, I want to re-emphasize the fact that unlike CAST and GAST, we didn't have this whole body of data. We wanted to be data driven, but this body of data did not exist. So that was one of the first things we realized. We had to organize this community, everyone from recreational users all the way up to commercial users, to how are we going to start this? How's this going to get collected? How are we going to analyze it? And I really like the fact that this is really industry and recreational private users doing this for themselves. It's not the FAA doing it to them. We're helping, we're enabling, but it's actually that community coming together that's really pulling itself up by the bootstraps of safety. And so, the ASRS work is very important to us, very, very, very vital. And one of the roles that we do a lot of in any safety promotion and education, we, the FAA, in this quickly evolving world, can bring to the UAST, here's where we're headed. Here's where we think we need your help with things like education, particularly with the recreational users. How do we reach those recreational users and help them understand their role in this safety ecosystem? I was really happy this weekend. I was out with family and friends at a picnic in the Shenandoahs at one of our beautiful wineries. And all of a sudden I saw a drone take off, right? And I'm like, it certainly looks like he's operating beyond visual line of sight. So I waited, and he safely landed, and asked him, was he recreational or was he? And he said, oh, I'm already, I'm visual line of sight, I could see it the whole time. And here's my external markings. And I'm like, great, that's what we really want to see. We want to see compliance. I'm glad you know the rules, because all I was going to tell you, if you don't know the rules, here's where you can go get them. And I'd really love you to go look at them. So it's been a great partnership, hearing from industry what they're hearing, what they're seeing, and FAA being able to bring our perspective, and then collaborating on how do we build a safety culture that's as equally as strong as any other part of aviation, but also meets the needs of this community, because this isn't an airline. These aren't GA pilots. You know, this is a very different community with a broad set of interests. And how do we help identify and coalesce around those common safety good things that we can do?
Right. And it feels odd asking these questions since I'm on the UAST. But the one thing that
But somebody's got to ask the questions, Pete.
That's right.
You don't want me asking Sean questions.
That could get interesting. You keep talking about collaboration. I was struck by the fact that when we did start this up, and when there wasn't, although we were using models of other types of organizations like this, we didn't have our own, and we didn't have the data and the collaboration that went into developing the work groups, the data work group, the communications work groups, all the different work groups, to actually get the information we needed to start building this as a team. I thought that was, I was very impressed with the way that was done and the way you two led that. So let's get into a little bit about, so the airspace was designed for very specific pilot in cockpit aircraft, and they operate in a specific way, and the rules and regulations have been written around those, not envisioning at all what we're getting into now. Now we have a new set of stakeholders. They're new to aviation: oil and gas companies, railroads, drone responders, you know the long list of them. So how do we bridge that gap between new users and existing users of the airspace? And how do we, you know, you brought up a very, this goes right into that question, Jay. You brought up a very good thing. You see somebody out operating a drone, and a lot of times I see people operating drones and they have no idea what the rules are. They don't know anything about airspace. They don't know at all how serious it is flying in the airspace system. And usually when I see someone, I see them flying a drone, my daughter goes, "Dad, please don't."
Yeah, my wife does that too. She says, you just can't help yourself, can you?
Right. Yep, that's exactly what my family says to me. So how do you bridge the gap? How do you educate? How do you get them talking to each other? And, you know, maybe we could talk a little bit about the DAC and things like that.
Yeah, so that is definitely the #1 challenge in this space, because in aviation under, say, Part 91 or Part 135 or 121, there is such a high bar to enter aviation, not just a skills test. You can't just go down to your local store and buy an airplane and climb in it and start flying, right? And the democratization of these aircraft has made it very easy for people to accidentally or maybe purposely enter aviation, but without knowing all of the responsibilities of a pilot and operator, you know, what it takes to maintain, you know, the need to maintain your equipment in good working order, checking the airspace around you. And that has been really the biggest challenge for us in the UAST. I think it's going to be an unsolved challenge for a long time. Now, how do you reach out to those communities? I do think as we move towards remote identification and the manufacturing requirements, so 3 years after remote ID is effective, we believe that's the compliance date, and 2 years after remote ID is effective, all drones manufactured in the U.S. should come with remote identification. And the sort of the cascading requirements through registration and all of that should firmly put the new purchaser on a path where they can't ignore their aviation responsibilities. They're going to have to actively participate in education, knowledge, registration in order to get that drone to operate. And I think that will be an important piece. But even in addition to that, this ongoing need to educate and reach this community through all sorts of means. We as the government can only penetrate maybe this far. A UAST with its arms can penetrate a little bit further.
And
But
organizations like ours.
yeah, it's really those organizations, particularly around the recreation, some of our recreational user organizations, that we've really got to get them engaged.
Okay.
Yeah, I think the key to making this a success is making compliance easy, making compliance consumable. And that's why looking at the work that ATCA and the ATC community has done has been great in helping to inform on the development of these very user-friendly tools before you fly, working on our safety enhancement activities to define and help inform operators the types of airspace that you should be cognizant on and the places that you should and should not be operating. I think that with that kind of education and compliance posture that the FAA has clearly been moving towards, there's going to be a lot more there's going to be a better facility towards getting people to practice safe and responsible behavior when it comes to operating their aircraft. The other thing too that I probably need to edify a little bit is there's a big misnomer, like there's this kind of like binary world in which you have the like unmanned folks over here and the manned folks over there. And the fact of the matter is that if you look at like the oil and gas operations and the network inspection and persistent surveillance and all those things, a lot of them have already had their own FBO. They've already had their fixed base operation. A lot of them have aircraft fleets, and an awful lot of these enterprises actually have amongst them folks that have a background in manned aviations, which is great because then you have that melding of the the attitudes that are kind of inspired by legacy aviation, but they're very much inspired by innovation, and it's a great blend that we're seeing right now.
I absolutely agree with that. And Sean, one of my observations, those organizations that have existing aviation programs already understand SMS.
Right.
And what we've seen is their ability to transition their legacy aviation safety practices and SMS into unmanned aviation. They've done a great job. I think it's far more difficult for those who are entering the space through maybe the tech side, who don't necessarily have a background in traditional aviation. And one of the big findings we're having out of the IPP is being infused with legacy aviation really does give you a leg up on understanding your operation, understanding the safety requirements, understanding how to get safety approvals, how to operate safely. Now, not everyone's going to have that, but I think as this community grows, it's that ability to take and move safety cultures from entity to entity that we'll see more and more of and we'll be able to take greater advantage of.
Yeah, which is why it's so helpful to have folks that have backgrounds as dispatchers and controllers that are getting hired in a lot of these tech companies, having that blend of folks that are like software development engineers and systems architects, and having them, pair it up with the folks who understand the processes and how the traffic system works is incredibly powerful.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Hey, Jay, Jim X said, thanks for dispelling the rumors of his demise.
I saw that.
You mentioned the IPP, and Sean, earlier you mentioned public-private partnerships, triple Ps. And I think the IPP, if you'd explain just quickly, Jay, what that is for anyone on here that doesn't know, because I think that's a perfect example of the FAA reaching out into industry to help them solve challenges and work together to get to a common goal.
Sure. the president and the White House and Secretary Chow saw a real need 3 years ago to kind of jumpstart this industry. They saw there were lots of people who wanted to operate. They didn't know how to navigate the bureaucracy of the FAA. They were coming from non-legacy backgrounds, and the FAA was struggling with policy and being able to adapt our current regulatory framework and get these folks in the air safely. We were really stifling the industry. And so they put together a 3-year program, and we're in the 3rd year of the 3-year program. It ends October 25th, with 9 lead participants who are state, local, or tribal, who are all doing work in this space that is not only maturing their operations, but giving us the very valuable information we need in order to mature our policies. I'll give you 2 examples of great outcomes. And a little secret, we've already written our draft final report, so I know what the results and findings are. So 107 is a great visual line of sight rule. But one of the things we learned under IPP is trying to take that 107 and turn it into a beyond visual line of sight rule isn't working so well. So we're now putting in place, what are those other policy steps? What are those other regulatory or policy steps that we want to put in place to get everyone up to safe, scalable, economically viable beyond visual line of sight? Okay. It's a great finding that came out through their operations and ours. Another one, we have 2 Part 135 air carriers operating drones as their fleet. And we have a number of others on the way, but those both came to us through IPP. That's the wing operation going on out in Christiansburg, Virginia, and then the UPS Flight Forward down in North Carolina. And that taught us so much about our regulatory framework. So for example, we knew we wanted to use our existing regulatory framework, but as you said, Pete, it was designed for airplanes where the human's sitting in it and flying around in the aircraft, right? It wasn't designed where the human is someplace remote and the aircraft is over here and you're controlling it remotely. So walking through the 135 exemptions really showed us what are the performance characteristics that we need to go back and define and embody so that we can get these air carriers up and running in a more scalable way. So that right now we're involved in the discussion internally. Is it better to take 135 and make it a performance-based rule? You know, revamp 135 for everybody? Or is it easier to make a new rule that's specifically for drones and commercial air carrier status? But it's the IPP and these partnerships that are informing those discussions. As a bureaucracy, we typically get stuck in our own imaginations when we don't have data. So we would have sat there and churned and debated among ourselves and done nothing for the industry if we hadn't had the IPP and the ability to partner there. We also have another vehicle we use. We call them our Partnership for Safety Plans. And that's where a company that is doing groundbreaking work that would benefit us in terms of informing future policy, we partner with them as well.
Okay. Well, that was a very comprehensive answer. So when we're
I've practiced it, Pete.
Yeah, yeah, this isn't your first rodeo. So, you know, when we're talking about rules and regulations and we're talking about the types of things you're talking about, it gets me thinking about best practices and, you know, how we use the experience of industry. How's the UAST collaborating internationally so that we can harmonize solutions, global solutions? I'm not sure we're ever going to get to where we're all going to have exactly the same rules and regulations, but I think lessons learned and best practices come out of communications with the more people, the better type thing.
Yeah. Sean, you want to start?
Yeah, sure. So I think a really, really good example of that is the work that the UAST has been doing in terms of developing and promulgating safety management system rules and kind of best practices for operators. I'm sure that a lot of the folks obviously on this call are, as Jay had mentioned before, are very, very familiar with SMS. And in point of fact, if you look at a bunch of the, for instance, the Part 107 waivers for flying at night and flying for extended distances and the likes, and especially those that are going to be operating over people, some of the core requirements is that they have a safety risk identification and a mitigation plan, and which speaks to the core elements of SMS in terms of setting policy, having mitigations, and the safety assurance component and the like. And so one of the great things has been the opportunity to have the similar discussion with our partners overseas. And there's a process called the safety specific operational risk assessment, which was kind of, its point of origin was more over in Europe. But when you start kind of decomposing the things that you do through this kind of specific operational risk assessment, and then you compare it side by side with the way that you would do a safety risk assessment, there's a lot of similarities. And so I think kind of promoting that kind of standard or that standardized approach in which you have these same core elements where you first identify your business case, your concept of operations, and you decompose it and understand what the different phases of the operations, and then you identify the risk factors, and then you basically identify the mitigations. All that stuff is kind of universal, but having that framework that we've now developed and published and posted on our site, I think it is invaluable because that's really agnostic to where you're operating. All those principles apply equally wherever you're operating.
Absolutely, and we take things like the UAST SMS and promote it internationally when we're meeting with our international partners. We always make it a point to remind them, here's where you can go and get additional material from the UAST. I think one of the other areas that the UAST is really setting the precedent worldwide is it is the only industry government partnership around UAS safety that I know of. So we're promoting it as the model of what everyone should do. You know, each region or country, however they decide to organize themselves, should be building this same relationship, should be building this community of operators that can come together and have this conversation about safety. And we promote that both when we're talking to the regulatory side, to other operators overseas. I think we're seeing that this really truly is a global industry from its very beginning. The aircraft are designed and built all over the world. They're operated all over the world. People really want to be able to transition their operations from one regulatory authority to another with the minimal amount of change, and we in the FAA would like to see that too. We believe it's good for the industry. As Sean said, they may compete in the marketplace, but no one competes on safety. And so we're very much using it as a part of our message when we work internationally on harmonizing UAS issues from the regulatory and the air traffic side, to emphasize the need for having something like a UAST.
Right. Okay. I'm going to go to the audience for a moment for a question. So a 50-pound commercial drone suffering a hardware or software failure is an immediate danger to people and things below. When will drone compliance with the Airline Safety Critical Avionics Software Standard DO 178 Charlie and Hardware Reliability Standard DO 254 be required? Sounds like a Jay question.
Yeah. So our ops over people rule for the 107 crowd will deal with that. we're taking a very aggressive position right now in trying to get more and more companies to get their aircraft into the standard airworthiness process. Type certification is the basis on which all the operating rules start. They assume that you have a type certified aircraft. And we're in a particularly difficult position right now that because we have the authority under 44807 for the secretary to waive the need for airworthiness where it's determined there is no need, those aircraft aren't type certified, so we don't have the same assurances. The good news is we have 12 that are actively involved in getting type certification. And these aren't just specific companies trying to get their aircraft. I mean, it's not like a company that wants to operate its own fleet, building its own aircraft. These are also aircraft that are used by a number of users. And they're getting into the TC process, and they are now working towards the standards that are within their risk continuum reasonable to apply. And that's a policy decision that's made by our colleagues over in aircraft certification. So the real answer to that is we're moving everybody into TCs. 44807s are expiring. We need to get everybody into TCs so that they can continue to fly when those expire in 2023. And the standards will very much, the standards we apply will be very much scaled to the risk. Again, back to this SOAR concept that's Sean was talking about. Because, you know, an aircraft that weighs 5 to 10 pounds and is predominantly an aircraft that's used for short range picture sensor kind of work, doesn't need the same level of design assurance or type certification airworthiness than something that is 55 or 100 pounds and is going, you know, 100 or 200 miles doing linear infrastructure inspection, for example.
Yeah, there's nothing that is inherently more or less safe about a vehicle that weighs 54 pounds versus a vehicle that weighs 56. Although the way that they're addressed, especially by operational rule, it could be very different. But at the end of the day, regardless if you're operating on a 107 or if you're going through a more formal certification and airworthiness approach, you still have to ensure that you're hitting the appropriate target, the appropriate level of safety for the intended operation. Some of that may mean referencing industry standards and well-known standards such as DO 178 for software and 254 for design and 160 for environmental testing and all those other kind of things that are well known to the legacy community. Some of it might involve operational mitigation, so that way you can ensure that you're that the all-in operation is hitting that level of safety. And I think that Jay, you mentioned it before, remote ID and all those things. That's why it's so incredibly important that we keep on leaning in and moving forward and developing these industry standards, which make it that much easier for operators to go and reference those and use those as reference points as they build out their airworthiness campaigns.
Right. We're getting a lot of questions about educating the public on safety rules, regulations, airspace requirements, those types of things. Sean, you want to talk for a minute about specifically what the UAST is doing? We actually had one comment that said, why don't you put some things on YouTube? And maybe you could talk about our communications plan.
Great question. I'm really glad you asked that, Pete. So I don't want to, a little bit of a spoiler alert, but one of the things that Jay and I are going to be doing in exactly 14 minutes from right now is sitting down with our steering committee and taking a deep dive on our launch page. And one of the things which has been conveyed to us loud and clear from small proprietorships, from larger operators and the like, is we need to be a lot more crisp on the guidance that we're putting out. And in many cases, it's already been developed, but make it more consumable through the course of people accessing our website, Unmanned, at the UAST site. some of the work that's actually already been done and delivered within the UAST is the first phase of our safety enhancements for airspace awareness. And we're kind of just nominally calling it safety out of the box. And so what we're promoting is for manufacturers, scaled manufacturers, individual folks to design vehicles that are going to have the ability to be programmed so that way they avoid airspace that's kind of cordoned off as restricted areas, or the ability to ensure that they're avoiding TFRs, and places governed under Part 99, military areas and the like. I think that's one part of it, and that's kind of a technical and design solution. I think the other part is another thing that we're really excited about is just basic awareness and skills that anybody should be thinking about as they're operating their vehicle, in terms of what kind of gear are you flying? Do you know if it comes with geofence capabilities or not? Have you pulled up the before you fly page on your cell phone and pull up the site, because you can actually geolocate yourself and look for the rings that you should stay out of. I mean, just basic stuff like that. I think that will be incredibly helpful, but you got to make sure that it's consumable. You have to make sure that it's easily understood in such a way that you don't necessarily have to be a CFI or a commercial pilot to understand those things. And I think we're moving in that direction.
Or an air traffic controller. I have to.
Or an air traffic controller.
Right. One of my tasks from the UAST is writing airspace requirements for the non-aviation professional. And I'm finding it very challenging because normally when you talk about airspace, there's a certain level of expectation that I'm speaking to someone that has some level of understanding, but this has to be written to a level of no understanding. And again, you have to also, one of the things I think the UAST is primary role is to make sure people understand that once they're flying in the airspace system, they are now professionals. They're now aviation professionals, and there are things they have to do, and the severity of if you don't follow the rules and the regulations.
Yeah, I would also add, it's a good point about YouTube. We're constantly looking for new ways to communicate and reach these folks. But one shift the FAA has made is we're going to be relying much more on the UAST for this year's Drone Safety Awareness Week. And so that will be an opportunity if people have ideas of materials and products they'd like to get out there. I think letting us know what they would like, and we can, especially if you want to produce that product and just tell us here's a link, right? So that we can promote it during Drone Safety Awareness Week.
Why don't you tell everyone when that is?
Did we decide on a week this year?
Not yet, but it's going to be in the last quarter. It's going to be probably early December.
Okay.
Yeah. But it's very much a crowdsourced. We realize that trying to take this on as a monolithic governmental group or just the tiny UAST trying to reach this whole community on their own is a strategy that will end up in a very small number of people hearing about it. Right. It really does need to be a crowdsourced effort, and we're looking for ideas on how to improve our crowdsourcing of this education and information.
Yeah, the Drone Safety Awareness Week that we hit this past year was our first launch of the event, and we're actually able to reach out and pretty much touch all the states in the U.S. as well as a bunch of international locations. So actually, that's one of the focused activities that we're doing this year inside the Unmanned Aircraft Safety Team. Is we have a dedicated cadre of folks that are going to be working from this point up to the event launch, looking at different social outlets, Twitter, YouTube, Facebook, all the different kind of things, encouraging the posting of links and hashtags and the like, and kind of reaching out. There's this kind of phrase that I'm not sure I fully like. They call it reaching the unreachables, the folks that don't go on the FAA FAST team and don't really hop on the FAA site, but is very, very important in terms of their because of the populace that you're dealing with. That's the kind of stuff that we're really looking to do and looking for help with.
So we can expect a drone TikTok soon?
Probably not, but
probably not. Hey, I've got a statement here. It's not really a question, so I'll try to turn it into one. If you truly want industry users involved, you need to reach further into the community to the 98%, which is what we're actually talking about right now, of the users, the small business owners. There's plenty of expertise outside of the big businesses. So what are you doing to address that? What are we doing to address that at the UAST?
Well, I think we would encourage those small business owners or the people who represent them. In some cases, they are a part of another association.
Right.
Like realtors. It's not reasonable to have every realtor in the world participate on the UAST, but an organization representing them. And I think if there are organizations that represent a group of small business owners that really can take that message to them, I'd love to hear from them. Let us know. We'd love to see you get involved in the UAST. I know, so it's a larger business, but the communication tower companies have been very good at sharing their information. The Edison Electrical Institute, which is which all the energy companies belong to, they've got an incredible campaign for sharing information among their members and their users. And we just talk to a few energy companies, and they go and talk to the rest of the energy companies.
Right.
So that's really, for me, the strategy that works the best is we can't get 10,000 small business owners, but if we can identify the 10 organizations that represent them and their interests well, we'd love to engage with them.
Yeah, it's kind of funny you mentioned that. I'm kind of looking sideways because I pulled the PowerPoint, or at least the presentation stuff that we gave in our plenary back in May, and I'm looking at the roster of current member organizations. And to Jay's point, we cover groups that represent recreational drone pilot testing, a bunch of the FAA's UAS test sites, some of the associations that represent like the News Media Coalition and the like, upwards of 70 to about 75 members, who a lot of are obviously associations that have those small business interests that are represented. And of course, you have like large organizations like the Academy of Model Aeronautics, which within their membership have a lot of those same people. So we're trying to strike the right balance between making sure that we keep the group cohesive and kind of moving forward when it comes to coming up with work activities and working groups and everything else. But we really, truly do want to, have a good cross-sectional area to include all the small business enterprises as well as, larger companies like mine.
All right. Hey, I promised I'd get you out of here just by 5 minutes to the hour so that you can attend your next meeting. I wish we had more time. We have a lot more questions. As Abigail has typed to the group, we'll try to get those questions. We will get those questions over to you, Jay or Sean, whoever it's most appropriate for, and we'll try to get those answers back to the people who asked the questions. Thanks for your time, guys. I wish we had more time. This is an interesting topic. I could talk about it all day.
Fly safe over the holiday, everybody.
Yep, definitely. All right. Thank you very much.
Pete.
Thanks. Take care.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.